Hi there, I'm Lena Anani, and you're listening to She Wrote a Book, where I interview amazing women from all over the world who also happen to be published authors. I created this show to educate, entertain, and inspire you to be the voice you want to hear in the world. Now let's get started. You are listening to episode number 146 of She Wrote a Book, and today I'm interviewing Marion Claire, author of the book Secrets of a Unique and Sexy Speaker, 155 helpful tips for writing your speech, facing the audience, and overcoming fear. In this book, you'll find techniques to create and deliver a speech for every occasion, overcome pre-speech nerves, avoid tripping over your tongue, and always look and feel like a calm, cool, confident, and sexy speaker. Originally a TV comedy writer and co-creator of The Love Boat, Marion Claire has been a coach, speaker, and speechwriter for 18 years. As a recovered agoraphobic, she has a unique understanding of the fear of performing in front of an audience. Again, her book is called Secrets of a Unique and Sexy Speaker, 155 helpful tips for writing your speech, facing the audience, and overcoming fear. You can find a link to purchase her book in our show notes for this episode at SheWroteABook.com/146. So I am so excited to be interviewing you, Marion, today. My first question is this: what inspired you to write and publish your book?
Well, I've always been a writer. In my first life, I was the co-creator of The Love Boat, and I wrote for many sitcoms, including Mary Tyler Moore and Alice and Who's the Boss and a bunch of others I don't even remember. So when I became a coach, people began to ask me, how do I do it? How do I become a great speaker? And I thought it seemed only natural for me to just write a book that would answer their questions. So I wrote the book.
Okay, well, I feel like first of all, I should say the audience should know that I'm a huge fan of The Love Boat. And so when this came through, I was like, what? I am so excited. I get to talk to Marion. This is amazing. And then the more I learned about you, the more I connected with you because just this fear of public speaking. I was deathly afraid of public speaking just 6 years ago. And now I'm doing stand-up. So it's like, I am a firm believer of the art of getting over your fear of public speaking. So I want to know, what's your experience been like, your personal experience with that?
Well, first of all, good for you. It's not difficult, but it requires work to get over the fear of public speaking. First off, you have to find out where this fear comes from, I think. There are two things. One is called the inner game of speaking, and one is the outer game of speaking. The inner game is all of those limiting beliefs that we grow up with. Maybe it was a traumatic experience in school. Maybe it was growing up in a family where your older brother was always the star and you weren't. There's all kinds of reasons why people have a fear of getting up and expressing themselves. But once you figure out what those are, it is not difficult to actually get rid of those limiting beliefs and learn that what you have to say is really important. And it's important enough to stand up in front of people that will want to hear from you. So in my particular case, I grew up in a very what is the word? Restricted, I guess, environment where a great deal was expected of me, and I was afraid to fail. And eventually, that turned into agoraphobia, agoraphobia is really the fear of going anywhere where you don't feel safe. And certainly, standing up in front of an audience is a very scary place for a lot of people. But then I learned that I was strong enough and I was okay enough and that there was no reason for me to fear failure because what I had to say and how I said it seemed to appeal to a whole lot of people. So I had some therapy, but mostly I studied other speakers. I watched other people speak, and I read books. There were a few books out there. And finally one day I said to myself, okay, if I want to get up and be a speaker, I've got to see if I can do it. So I went to Toastmasters. And I recommend the Toastmaster program. They're really good. They take a long time, however. It can take, as much as a year for you to overcome a lot of your limiting beliefs. But if you want to do it faster, then you work with a coach, someone like me who has a program that will enable you to break through those limiting beliefs, get rid of them, and find the confidence within yourself that will enable you to stand up in front of a room and say, this is what I have to say. I know it's worthwhile. You're going to love hearing it. And the audience does. They respond. They applaud. And that's a great feeling.
It's a fantastic feeling, and I love that you tipped your hat to Toastmasters, because that was my first step in my journey. And it literally took me just that first speech for me to get over my fear of public speaking.
Good for you. It took me a little bit longer. Well, I have to be truthful. The first night I went to Toastmasters, they have something where it's called table topics, where you get up and you speak extemporaneously about something you've never heard of before. And they said, we'll give you an easy one. And they said, tell us about the most unforgettable person you've ever met. And I didn't say my mother, and I didn't say a teacher, and I didn't say anybody like that. I got up and I said, my therapist. And then I proceeded to tell them why my therapist was such a terrific person and how helpful she had been for me. And I had 2 minutes, and I finished on the button, and everybody applauded, and I was hooked, absolutely hooked.
I love it. What a great story. I'm remembering my first meeting at Toastmasters. All I had to do was stand up, give my name, where I'm from, and why I'm there. And I did it while crying the entire time.
Well, good for you. That's tremendous courage. You know, people don't know what kind of courage they have in them until they test themselves at something like that. So you should pat yourself 5 times on the back and say, I deserve it, because you do.
I love it. You're so positive. It's awesome. So you talked about limiting beliefs. People have limiting beliefs going into or holding them back from public speaking. What are some of the most common limiting beliefs we have about that?
I'm afraid I'll make a mistake. I'm afraid I'll say something wrong. I'm afraid I'll forget something. I'm afraid that there'll be somebody out there in the audience that knows better than I do, that doesn't believe what I'm saying. I'm afraid they won't agree with me. There's tons of them. But those are the basic ones. Most people are afraid they'll make a mistake or afraid that they'll forget something, and they won't say it right. And somebody will come back afterward and say, I challenge you that what you said was wrong, and this is why, and they want to get into a whole big bloody thing about it. That never happens, by the way. But most of the time, even if you forget, there are techniques to go back and pick up the thing that you forgot. It's not difficult. It's a speaking technique. If you say something wrong, if you trip over your tongue, there's a technique where you can say, wait just a minute, let me try that again. And then you just go back and say it again. When you forget something, you go right on to whatever comes next. But then when you remember what you forgot, which you always will, you simply stop where you are and say, you know, there's something I'd like to add about what we were talking before. And then you go back and you add that thing that you forgot. The audience doesn't know that you didn't plan it that way. Okay? The audience always thinks that whatever you say, in whatever order you say it, is exactly the way you plan to do it. So they're with you all the way. Here's a major fallacy. People think when they stand up in front of an audience that the audience is waiting to throw stones at them, or is waiting to criticize them, or waiting to judge them and to find out how terrible they are. The exact opposite is true. The audience came into the room hoping that you're going to tell them something that they didn't know before and that they can take home with them and use in their lives. So they are rooting for you to succeed. They want you to succeed. They want you to tell them something that they can use that will make their life better. So they're always on your side. They're never sitting there waiting to judge you.
It's incredible. I love that, and 100% true. So how did you go from being an agoraphobic to being a public speaker?
To being a speaker?
And not just a speaker, but to being, the coach. Like, it's such an incredible journey.
It was. Being an agoraphobic, for me, it lasted over 20 years, and it meant that sometimes I had difficulty walking into the supermarket and standing in line to buy potato chips. But I had to go through a period of therapy. I had a really good therapist, which was lovely. I had to figure out what the toxic influences in my life were that were preventing me from going out and doing whatever it is I wanted to do, that were preventing me from living my life. And speaking was part of living my life because I certainly wanted to get up and do that. So it took a while, but I had to get rid of some people in my life that were very negative and were putting me down. I had to learn techniques. I had to learn confidence techniques of what to say to myself. Before I speak, whenever I get up to give a presentation, I have a mantra that I say to myself, and I recommend this for other people too. Right before you speak, when your heart is beating and you're a little short of breath and you're a little bit nervous, that's good, by the way. That's adrenaline, and that's going to keep you energetic and on your toes and make you sound enthusiastic and passionate. But in order to control that so it doesn't overwhelm you, I have a mantra that I always say several times just before I speak. Maybe I only need to say it once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times max, but I will stand up and I will say with a big smile on my face, and I'm saying this to myself, not to the audience, but to myself I say, okay, Marion, permit yourself to be delightful. And that always puts a big smile on my face. Okay, Marion, permit yourself to be delightful. And then I take 3 deep breaths, and then I start talking. And it works every time. I always feel energized and confident and happy that I'm doing what I love to do.
I love that. And I cannot wait to use that for myself. What an amazing
Absolutely.
tip. I love that. And is that how you channel the sexy speaker?
The idea, speaking is sexy, which is the name of my website, and how to be a unique and sexy speaker, which is the name of my book. Speaking is very sexy, but people don't automatically understand where that comes from. For me, whenever you open your mouth to speak and someone is listening, you have the opportunity to influence and to inspire. And being influential and inspirational, that is very sexy.
Indeed, absolutely. Love it. So my last question for you is this. What do you love most about being an author?
I love it when people come up to me and tell me how much they benefited from my book. It is such a thrill when someone says that they were always afraid of speaking, but they learned things from my book that have now made them overcome their fear or just be a better speaker. I've had people come up to me and say that they've been afraid to give a speech for years, and then they read my book and they practiced some of the techniques, and they got up and they gave their first speech in who knows how long. They were thrilled. I'm thrilled. It's just such a blessing when people tell me that.
That is a blessing, and what a beautiful response. I love it. Well, Marion, thank you so much for being our special guest today. We will have a link to your book in the show notes for this episode, and our listeners can find that at SheWroteABook.com/146 to learn more about our author and her very sexy book. Thanks again, Marion. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my total pleasure, Lena. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to all of your listeners.
Thank you for listening to She Wrote a Book. If you enjoyed this episode, then subscribe now so you can automatically get access to all new episodes, and feel free to share your inspired thoughts with us in the comments too. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, may you always feel good and make magic.